Don't forget to hit subscribe before we dive into this story, because once you step inside this cell, there's no way out. The sirens were still echoing when the guards dragged Elias Monroe down the dim corridor of Crescent State Penitentiary. His orange jumpsuit was torn at the shoulder, his wrists bruised from the cuffs biting into his skin. Blood dotted the concrete floor behind him. Not all of it, his. 10 years, the warden's voice said coldly, echoing through the corridor like a sentence carved into stone. 10 years in solitary, effective immediately. The door slammed shut behind him. The sound was final, metallic, merciless. Inside, there was nothing. Just 4 concrete walls, a steel toilet, a bed bolted to the floor, and a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like an insect trapped inside his skull. That was day 1. But this story doesn't start with punishment. It starts with a crime that no one ever fully understood. A year earlier, a riot had erupted inside Crescent State. 3 inmates were found dead, and 1 corrections officer vanished without a trace. The official report blamed gang warfare, but the whispers inside the yard said different. That the officer, Daniel Price, had been working with inmates to smuggle in drugs and cell phones. When the deal went wrong, Price disappeared. Some said Elias killed him. Others said he helped him escape. But there was one problem. The body was never found. Elias, once a quiet man serving time for armed robbery, suddenly became the prison's most feared name. Surveillance footage from the night of the riot showed him standing in the control room, staring straight into the camera, with a calm smile. Then static. By the time the feed came back, the control room was empty, and the door leading to the lower tunnels was open. Detective Laura Kent, a veteran investigator known for her relentless drive, was called in to piece together what really happened that night. She spent months interviewing guards, inmates, even Elias himself, but he never spoke. Not one word. "Do you know what happened to Officer Price?" she asked him through the reinforced glass. He just smiled and whispered, "He's still down there." The prison had sealed off the lower tunnels decades ago. Most guards didn't even know they existed. But the blueprints told a different story. A network of old maintenance shafts running under the West Block, where Elias used to work. When the investigation hit a dead end, Elias was accused of orchestrating the riot. Without solid proof but plenty of pressure from the media, the prison system made an example of him. 10 years in solitary confinement. He went in at 29. He'd come out almost 40. But that wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Because in 2022, during a renovation project, workers found something buried behind the West Block walls, a sealed steel door. On it, scratched into the rust, were 3 words. He was here. And when the investigators opened that door, what they found changed everything. When the construction team cracked open that corroded door in the West Block, the air that poured out was stale, thick, and colder than anyone expected. Dust particles floated like ash through the beam of a flashlight. The workers thought they'd found an old maintenance tunnel. They were wrong. It wasn't a tunnel. It was a room, 6 feet by 6 feet, soundproofed, with a single metal chair bolted to the center of the floor. Chains hung from the ceiling, rusted but still strong. On the walls, carved by hand, were hundreds of tally marks and a name, written over and over again. D. Price.
Detective Laura Kent stood in the doorway, the beam of her flashlight trembling slightly. "No one's been down here in years," the foreman said quietly. But Laura knew better. The dust on the floor wasn't as thick as it should have been. Someone had been here recently. They called in forensics. The room was scanned, samples taken, fingerprints lifted from the chair. And among the debris, buried in the corner near the drain, they found something impossible. A small, blackened ID badge, the name still legible, Officer Daniel Price. Only one question mattered now. How did it get here? And why was the door sealed from the outside? When the warden heard what they'd found, his reaction wasn't shock, it was fear. "Close it back up," he told Laura. "You don't know what you're dealing with." But she ignored him. She ordered the old prison surveillance archives, footage from the riot that started it all, hours of static-filled recordings, long believed to be corrupted. But using updated forensic software, her team managed to recover fragments. And what they saw in those fragments made her blood run cold. In one recovered frame, Elias Monroe was inside that very same tunnel. Behind him, Officer Price, alive, chained to the chair, his mouth gagged with cloth. Elias turned to the camera, lifted a hand, and pointed directly at it before the feed cut out. That was the last image ever recorded before the riot consumed the West Block. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Laura arranged a rare meeting with Elias, now 8 years into solitary confinement. He hadn't spoken to anyone in years, not even the guards. When she entered the observation room, he was sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, whispering something to himself. She pressed the intercom. "Elias, we found the room." His eyes opened slowly, calm, empty. "I told you, he's still down there." Laura frowned. "We found his ID, Elias, but no body." He smiled faintly. "That's because they moved it." "Who's they?" she asked. Elias leaned forward, his voice low. "You already work for them." The following night, Laura's office was broken into, files missing, surveillance wiped. The warden denied knowing anything, but the prison's internal security logs showed that someone with administrative access had deleted every record related to the West Block tunnels. And that sealed door, gone, welded shut again by morning. When Laura demanded answers, the warden told her she was off the case, effective immediately. But before she left the facility, an envelope appeared on her car windshield. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid, a photo taken inside the secret room. The timestamp read, January 5th, 2023, 03:14 a.m. In the picture, the chair was no longer empty. Someone was sitting in it, and chained to their wrist was a familiar tattoo, the same one Detective Laura Kent had seen 1,000 times in photos of Elias Monroe. The photo haunted Detective Laura Kent for weeks. The timestamp, the tattoo, the chair, every detail said the same thing. Someone was still inside Crescent State sealed tunnels after the prison had supposedly closed them off. But how could Elias Monroe be there if he was still locked in solitary confinement? She requested to see him again. The request was denied. Security reasons, they said. Inmate unfit for interviews. But Laura had never been the type to wait for permission. Late one night, she returned to the prison under the guise of closing out her files. A sympathetic guard slipped her through the lower levels, past the maintenance corridor no one used anymore. The air was heavy with rust and mold. Her flashlight flickered as she found the West Block, the same wall that had been resealed weeks before. Except now, someone had already been there. The weld was cracked open. The steel door hung slightly ajar.
Inside, the same cold hit her like before, sharp and chemical. The chair sat in the center of the room again, chains loose and clinking softly in the stillness. No one was in it. But on the floor, under the leg of the chair, she saw a thin envelope. Her name was written on it, in careful, deliberate handwriting. Laura. Inside were 3 photographs. The first, a young Elias Monroe, before prison, smiling, free. The second, Officer Daniel Price, his arm around a woman. Laura recognized her. It was her sister, Emily Kent. The third photo was the worst, the 2 of them together, standing in front of a motel, dated 1 week before the prison riot. Laura staggered back, the pieces clicking together like glass shattering in slow motion. Emily had disappeared years earlier, listed as a runaway. But now it was clear. She'd been involved with Price, And maybe Elias. A scraping noise snapped her out of thought. From the tunnel behind her, footsteps echoed. Slow, deliberate. She turned, flashlight trembling in her hand. "Elias?" His voice came first, low and calm. "I told you, detective." They moved him. He stepped into the light, thinner than before, his hair long, eyes sunken but strangely peaceful. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be in solitary half a mile away. Laura whispered, "How did you get out?" Elias smiled. "I never left." She stared at him. "That's not possible." He stepped closer, pointing at the walls covered in tally marks. "This is solitary, detective. This room. They called it the lower program. The ones they wanted forgotten, they sent us here. 10 years, no sunlight, no sound, just memory." Laura's heart pounded. "Then who's in your cell upstairs?" Elias looked at her with something like pity. "You still think they tell you the truth?" Suddenly, the sound of boots, guards shouting, the beam of a flashlight swept across the tunnel, and Elias was gone, vanished into the darkness. The warden appeared behind the guards, face pale. "Detective Kent, you shouldn't be here." She held up the photos. "You knew my sister. She was with Price. You covered it up." The warden's jaw tightened. "Your sister was part of the smuggling ring. Price used her to move contraband in and out. When it went bad, Elias killed him. She ran." "That's a lie," she hissed. He stared at her, eyes cold. "You want proof? Go upstairs. Look in cell 23. See for yourself who's been in solitary all these years."
She ran, up the stairwell, through the metal corridors, the noise of the prison fading behind her. Cell 23, the one that had been locked since the day Elias went in. 2 guards opened it at her demand. Inside, a man sat on the floor, cross-legged, head shaved. When he looked up, Laura's flashlight froze. It wasn't Elias Monroe. It was Daniel Price, alive. He smiled weakly. "They said I'd be safe here, if I played along." Laura stumbled back, realization crashing over her. Elias had taken the fall. The warden, Price, and whoever ran the operation had buried the truth, locking the wrong man away. She rushed back down to the tunnels, but Elias was gone. Only the empty chair remained, swaying slightly as if someone had just stood up. Weeks later, Crescent State was shut down under federal investigation. No trace of Elias Monroe was ever found. But in the warden's abandoned office, pinned to the wall behind a broken clock, was a single note, written in the same hand that had addressed Laura's envelope. It read, "10 years alone teaches you what freedom really costs." And beneath it, in faint pencil, "He was here." If you thought this story was intense, you're not ready for what comes next. Subscribe, because some prisons don't have walls, they have secrets.